Morning, sir.
Good morning, Rohit.
Rohit, sir.
Good morning.
Um, am I audible, Rohit?
Yes, you're perfectly audible.
All right. So shall we start or we'll wait?
Just 1 minute. I
Yeah.
think maybe a few more students might join. Afterwards, I will introduce you and then we could begin.
Right.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to our second session of the photography workshop with architect Amit Chatterjee. For those of you who are returning, he needs no introduction, having completed a very interesting and informative session the previous week. He has once again returned for the second day of this workshop. And for those who have attended last week's lecture, I'm sure that all of you are very eager for this session. So, without much further ado, sir, if you would begin, please.
Thank you so much, Rohit. So welcome back, everyone, to our second session. And before we start the second session, I'll just brush you through what we discussed last session. The last module, actually, we spoke about a couple of things. That was more about the introduction to photography. In that, we started with what photography actually is by a definition, which was not from a physicist point of view or an artist point of view, but which was more from a photographer point of view. And it just spoke about three things, that is light, sensitivity, and time. And then we spoke about different types of cameras that are available. We'll be speaking about it in detail in today's class. And for those of you who own a DSLR, as I said, this course doesn't need you to have a DSLR, but for those of you who are fortunate enough to get one, it will be helpful if you can keep your DSLR handy with you. If you can keep your DSLR with you, because this particular session, today's session, will talk about the technicalities. And then after introducing you to the kind of cameras we have, I spoke about the different genres of photography that's there. We spoke about portrait, we spoke about landscape, we spoke about architecture photography, we spoke about newborn photography, product photography. And as I understand, you guys got to know that every photography has its own characteristics. Every kind of photography has its own characteristics. Every photography has its own pros and cons, and every photography style has its own requirement, may it be from lens point of view, may it be from camera point of view, or may it be from the compositional point of view too. So today's module, as I had discussed before in the introduction class, that we'll be stretching this entire course over three modules. The first module spoke about the introduction. Today we'll speak about the mechanics of photography. That will be basically about camera, lenses, the types of modes that we have. That's why I told you, if you guys have your camera with you, keep it handy. Some of your smartphones are also capable of manual mode and changing the modes. So keep that also, because the concept behind clicking the photograph is almost same, whether you have a DSLR or a Pro DSLR or a medium format or a compact. So this the concept, the basic concept, the outline of this entire, all the camera components are almost same. It's just the sensor size that varies, and that makes the difference. So that we will talk about today. And in the next class, the next upcoming Monday, that will be the last module of this particular course. That module will be talking about one of the most important aspect of photography. That will be the composition and how to think like a photographer. That means we will be talking about various rules that are involved in photography, various things that are involved in photography, various things that you should keep in mind while clicking photography. And we will stress on architecture photography a little more in detail, because finally that's our genre, or that's our domain. So I will start with the second module today. Okay, so I hope I am my screen is visible. Can someone please
Yes,
confirm?
it's perfectly
Rohit, can you?
visible.
Okay. So basically, last time we spoke about module 1, and this time we are talking about module 2. Now, in module 2, our focus goes on to two things. One is camera basics, and third is lens. So basically, when you talk about, let's say, for example, I just hand my camera. I have a mirrorless camera. This particular, I think last time while speaking about mirrorless to compact and things like that, we spoke about all, and we were talking about what are the differences between a mirrorless camera and a compact camera and a bridge camera to a DSLR camera. But we spoke about it in just, it was more like an overview. So today we will speak about the entire camera system in detail. Even if you have a phone camera, most of this terminologies goes well for you. Most of it is almost similar. There will be few more advancement in DSLRs and mirrorless camera that I will let you guys know. So we will start with camera basics and why we require camera basics. Because see, for example, if you want to be let's say, for example, if you have a hobby to ride bike, that's different than being a biker. So when you become a biker, you need to know about the machine that you're riding, because if something goes wrong, or there might be requirement set by yourself, that you want to do specific things with your bike or specific things in the ride. So in that case, you need to know your bike well. Similarly, in photography, if you're taking it as a hobby, is different, then you need not know so much. But in case if you are going to get serious about photography, then it's utmost required that you go through your camera and you know the parts of the cameras. When I say parts of the cameras, from a photographer point of view, this talks not about the physics of the camera, although we should know the physics, but this basically talks about the know-how of the entire instrument that is available with us. So that is why camera basics is required, and this is one of the most technical terminology that we will be studying now, the technical terms. So the first thing is, camera consists of almost thousands of components inside this tiny particular instrument has thousands of moving particles inside that. It has thousands of nuts and screws and bolts inside that. So if we are going to dismantle a camera, this is going to be a very tedious job, because there are so many things there inside to capture just one shot that we want to take in. But what is required from our point of view is more of this. So right now what you're looking at, this is a picture of an Nikon camera, but it's what I'm holding right now is a mirrorless DSLR. Sorry, a Sony mirrorless, and you can either have a Canon. So most of these things that I'm going to talk about right now will be almost similar for all the cameras. So when now we are looking at the back of the camera, and as you know, this particular thing is the eye view. So this is where you put your eye and see, or you might have something which will be displayed on this particular panel, which is known as the LCD panel, which stands for liquid crystal display. So basically, liquid crystal display is to either view what you want to take or to compose what shot. Hello. Okay. So basically, it is to view or to compose the shot that you are trying to take. The next thing that you have is a diopter. Now, diopter is something which you will see. Basically, I don't know if you can see my camera, or else you can refer to the image that's there on your screen. If you can see, there is a small dial right next to your eyepiece. there's a very tiny dial. Okay, this is called diopter. Now the diopter is for people who have visual defects or who have glasses. Like those who have glasses, you must be knowing the, how do you say, how difficult it gets sometimes to take photographs with your glasses on, because you, and most of the photographers, they do like taking photographs with the eyepiece rather than composing on the LCD, because the LCD is somewhat gives you a fake image, especially in a DSLR, because it's getting reflected by pentaprism, which we will talk about in the next few slides ahead. We'll be talking about the whole working of DSLR. I'll explain you what exactly is pentaprism. So, but when you see through a eyepiece, you are seeing what exactly is there. So this is more natural. Plus, in older days when we had real cameras, we did not really have a LCD screen. So most of the photographers, they are used to taking photographs, or they like taking photographs with the eyepiece. But if you have a glass, then what do you do? So there is a diopter over here. You can adjust that according to your eyesight. So what it does is, there is a plus sign and a minus sign on your camera near the diopter. So you can either increase it or decrease it, and the camera will adjust according to your eye power, somewhat to your eye power. It won't be perfect, but you'll be able to see even without a glass. So that is what diopter does. And if you have to hand over the camera to someone else, he has to reset the diopter. Otherwise, he'll be seeing the powered vision also. So it will be blurry for a normal person with a normal eye, but it will be basically for you. The next one we talk about is playback button. So most of us are almost used to this button. Right after clicking a photograph, if we want to see what is there in the photograph, or if you want to review the photograph, so you just go back and click this button, and this shows you the photograph. The next one is info. Now info button gives you the histogram. This is a technical terminology. The histogram basically talks about the settings that was used at that particular time for that particular photograph. So let's say, for example, these days with digital photograph that we have, with digital cameras that we have, we click millions of photographs, we click thousands of photographs. What happens is, when we have so many photographs, we it's impossible to remember the settings that we have used. Many a times you must have seen photographers who use these settings to show, let's say, for example, if I talk about Raghurai, or if I talk about any of the famous photographers, when they click photograph and the masterpiece, they sometimes write what ISO they have used, what focal length they have used, what was the shutter speed. So these are the three major components that they write for us to understand, or for us to learn from them. So, but what if you have taken 1,000 photographs? Do you remember what settings you have used in that particular photograph? No. So info button uses that, and info button gives you that information. You can use that, and it will give you the histogram. Now histogram is also like a graph. A professional photographer will know how to read a histogram properly, but for us, if we want to know, it will give you three major or three basic components of this particular thing. One will be one will be ISO, one will be shutter speed, and the other one will be the focal length. So it will be basically ISO, let's say, for example, 2000, and f 3.4, that is the focal length is 3.4 or 4.8 or whatever you have used, and shutter speed will be 1 by 8000, 1 by 6000, 1 by 1000, depending on what shutter speed you have used. Now this three particular terminology that we spoke about, shutter speed, ISO, and focal length, we'll be talking about that in detail. And it's important to know those three terminologies and know how to control those particular aspects, because that is all is camera about. So the next point is adjustment dials. You guys almost know about this. This is the adjustment dial in a Sony, and that's on an Nikon. So you can basically change this to go through, or to navigate through your menu system, and to go to the next image and things like that. The next one is delete photographs over here with a trash can symbol. If you can see this on a Sony, it's on the bottom right hand corner, but on an Nikon, it's over there. And delete photographs, although it's there, you can delete it, but I always suggest my students not to delete their photographs, because sometimes what happens is, we click 15 photographs and we just delete whatever we don't like. But only when you flash it, as I said, a photographer, a great photograph can sometimes happen by accident too, and it need not look pretty all the time. And the second thing is, if you flash it on the desktop, the whole feel, when you see it on a screen or when you see it on a projector, the whole feel of the photograph differs. You might start liking what you wanted to delete. So it's always advisable to carry a extra SD card and not delete your photograph until and unless you are seeing it on the desktop. You can get it back to your desktop, put the SD card, copy the photographs, have a review, and then delete it. Sometimes you might have clicked really nice photograph, but because of this tiny LCD screen, you are not able to know the potential of it, and you just deleted it. And it's once deleted, it's gone. So I suggest not to use this delete photos often. Only if you have, let's say you have run out of space, or you have to delete some photographs to click some more, then only delete. And that also, take your time and delete. Don't just go bang 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 and then delete all half the photographs, because you might have deleted a masterpiece too, which you are not aware at that point of time. Many times it has happened with me. I come back home, I look at my photographs, and those which I feel on the field are really nice might not be that good, rather than those which I was about to delete. But I on the screen I figure out, wow, this is a really nice photograph, so I should have kept it, or I would like to keep it. But if I have deleted it, then it's gone. So the next point is, now we are looking at the top of your camera. So when you look at the top of your camera, obviously the first thing, now we are talking about DSLR, or it's the same thing even with a mirrorless or a bridge camera. What you are seeing right now is the lens. This is the lens. And there is also something known as a lens detachable button. So we will talk about it in right at the next slide. Then there is this obviously on and off switch over here. You can mode this dial to switch on or switch on or switch off a camera. You have a shutter button. Now this particular shutter button is half taken and full taken. Half taken means when you put half pressure on the button, it will first hunt and focus on certain thing. The full shutter button will open the shutter, and the shot gets recorded. So while taking photographs, first you go half, you see, you focus, and then you click, and that will actually record the photograph. So the half button is required because you want to know whether or not you have focused on the right thing that you wanted to focus on or not. The next one talks about is exposure button. Now in this Sony camera, the exposure, there is no button, but there is a dial for it. If you can see this, there is a dial for it, right? But in a Nikon, you might have an exposure button camera. In a DSLR of Canon, you will get an exposure. So what it does is it just controls the exposure. Sometimes, as I said, exposure is the amount of light flowing inside your camera. So sometimes you might want to reduce it. If it is a very harsh sun, you might have to reduce it. Or if it is somewhere a little darker, then you might want to increase it, so that your camera lets in more light and the image gets a little brighten up. So that's what that particular button does, and we will talk about this in detail when we are talking about each of this. The next one is mode dial. Now mode dial is this is one of the most important button in the camera. This sets the mode of your camera. That means by this you tell the camera what exactly you want to control. Now mostly we set it on auto. When we get the camera, it will be set on auto. That means the camera decides whatever is best for you, and that is pretty good for amateur photographers. The next point is when it is the few setup that are common in almost, you'll find it in all the cameras, are PAS and M. So the P is a program mode, the A is the aperture mode, the S is a shutter speed mode, and the M is the full manual control or the full manual mode. So as the name suggests, in aperture control, you basically control the aperture. In S, you basically control the shutter speed. Let's say, for example, if you want to take photograph of something which is going really fast, hence you need to control the shutter speed. So there you will put yourself into the S mode. So that's basically the mode of the dial, and we will talk about that in detail again in the next slide, where we will talk about each of this mode and characteristics of each of this mode, so that we know which mode to use during what, to click what. The next one is hotshot. So hotshot is basically over here mounted on top of the camera. This is actually, if you see many photographers who cover a lot of events will have an extra flash on them, because the tiny flash that we have in our camera is not enough to cover large events. So you might require an external flash with a greater power of light focus. So for that, what we do is we use an external flashlight, and that is mounted onto hotshot. So basically, why do we call it a hotshot is because it has an active current flowing through it. So once you click it, the active current flows through it, and it generates the flash. So that's called hotshot. You can also use it to mount mics. Sometimes I have seen people mounting mic. I have seen people mounting external noise reducers. So you can use them, but predominantly or commonly, external flash is used to, on a hotshot. The next one is a pop-up flash. So this, I think most of us know about. This is there in all the cameras. So basically, if you have your auto mode set, um, or if you want to give your camera, let's say the light you're taking is not very pleasant, or it's dark and you want a particular flash, you want to get the flash out. So the pop-up flash will just pop up, flash, and then go down. So there is a way this happens mostly in auto, because in auto, the moment it gets dark, the camera understands that it's getting dark and the pictures might come dark or blackish. So what it do is it will just pop up the flash by its own. But sometimes you can tell the camera not to. So there is in this particular image that's on your screen, you can see right below the auto there is a small how do you say, circle with a flash and a cross sign. That means if you set that particular dial, it will not take the flash no matter what. So you told the camera not to take the flash out even if it gets dark. That means you want to take something which is which should look dark or something like that. So basically you are telling them, or maybe you have a other kind of setting for the lighting and you do not want the flash to disturb that. So you can just set your mode into that no flash zone. So that is what it talks about. The third and the last part we are talking about, so first thing is lens detach. Now in a Sony it is over here, you can see, and in a Nikon it's on the left side over here. It's I have seen on Canon also, it's on the left side. So basically what it does is you have to press it and you have to twist the lens for the lens to come out. So once you twist the lens comes out, and then you have your body different and your lens different. You can change your lens, you can put your lens back, you can clean your lens and put it back. So basically the lens release is basically a button to take out your lens, and while putting the lens back you just have to make sure of two things. One is there is a tiny dot, if you guys can see, I'll just take it close. There is a tiny dot over here in the lens, and that same dot is there on the camera body too. All you have to do is align this particular lens dot to the camera body dot and just give it a soft twist, and the lens will get inside. It's very important for you not to put any force while putting a lens, and try to remove your lens as less as possible. I understand that photojournalists have to remove their lenses often. They have to change the lens, because if the subject is far they have to quickly switch to a telephoto. If the subject is very close, they have to get back to a prime. So in that sense it is understood. But let's say for example you are someone who's just learning, do not change your lens too often. Now I tell this because I myself have screwed up the sensor quite a lot of time, because every time you open the lens you are exposing the camera naked body to the outside. So if there is any dust or anything, or you might not even know, you just took up the camera and there is a breeze and some sand particles got inside your camera, then it's gone, because it will just stick to the sensor film and your all the photos will have a sand particle on it. So it gets very annoying to clean, and the camera shops will cost you a lot. The camera shops will charge you a lot to change this. So always it's advisable not to change your lens until and unless it is required. Don't just change your lens for fun sake. It's not something you should be playing around with. uh, Having said that, the next one is auto or manual focus. Now, this is something that we see in most of the cameras. As I said last time, autofocus is something that people use, amateur people use when they want the camera to decide whatever is best for them. That means they do not have the knowledge about the camera. But manual focus is something, it's how do you say, it's more customizable. That means you want to tell the camera what you want to focus on, rather than the camera telling you, this is what you should be focusing on. No, you tell the camera that, no, let's say, for example, if there is a person in front and there is a person in background, you want to blur out the person in front but not the background and focus on the background one. You can do that by manual focusing it. So you manual focus, there is a manual focus ring, and you focus slightly where you want. So the camera will hunt. First it will focus the one in front. You will tell no, you will move on, and it will go and focus the next person who is rear. So you could control by saying, I want to focus on the person who is behind and not the person in front. In an auto, maybe the camera will directly focus on the person who is in front, thinking that you want to take picture of that particular person. So you might be having an artistic, creative image in your mind that you want to click, but the camera might not allow you. That is exactly why you use the manual focus area. So you use that, you change that particular switch from A to M, and it will switch from autofocus to manual focus. In autofocus, no matter how much over you move that dial of focus, not the zoom ring. There are two rings on the lens. We will talk about when we are talking about lens in detail. So no matter how much ever you move the manual focus ring, it's not going to make any difference if you are in auto mode. It will only make difference, and you will see the difference when it's in manual mode. So you have to take it back to manual focus and then change the manual link. So it will start hunting for what you want to click. The next one is image stabilizer, and this is also known as vibration reducer in Nikon cameras. In Sony, it's called IS. In Canon, it's called image stabilizer. So image stabilizer is basically when you have a telephoto lens. Now we will talk about telephoto lens, but when you have a telephoto lens which can zoom a larger distance, you know how hard it gets to control your camera, because a little shake here and there and the whole image gets a lot blurry. So what you do is that time you switch on this image stabilizer, and the lens itself does a little bit of correction in it and reduces the vibration as much as possible. Now these days, like the camera that I own, it's a Sony Alpha 7 III mirrorless full flare camera. So in this camera, the IS is inbuilt. So the camera itself has an IS, not the lens. If I have a lens with another IS, then it will be just cherry on top. So but with any lens, I can basically have image stabilization done in my camera itself. Many DSLR gives you that particular how do you say option. Phone cameras these days come with amazing image stabilizer. So even if you're almost shaking the camera, the photograph that you take is still coming crisp. That's because of the image stabilizer. So that's what image stabilizer or vibration reducer does. Next, now this was all about your camera parts. All we understood about it in your entire camera, what's on top, what's on the side, what's on the back of the camera. Now we are going to talk about how your camera actually works, the physics of the camera. It's required because until and unless you know how a camera works, how do you think you will compose your photographs the way you want, right? So it's required. And to make you guys understand about how a camera works, let me first tell you about camera obscura. Now, camera obscura is something that a lot of people must have heard this terminology in class 8th physics, and when we were learning about light in CBSE. So at that point of time, they spoke about camera obscura. The best example of camera obscura I can give you is your eye. So the point is over here, any object that the camera wants or any object that you want to reflect on a camera, the light will pass through the pinhole and it will get reflected onto a mirror or a lens or something like that. But the image is always inverted, and that is also the case with our eyes. What we capture, the image is always inverted. It's our brain which flips it back and shows you what really it is. So there is a post process happening even after capturing the image. The eyes just capture the image in an inverted format, and your brain does the post processing and flips the image, and so that you see what exactly is there. So that's what camera obscura did. and that is how it worked. The next one was camera obscura, was actually used by artists, painters, a lot of time to document something manually, to paint something manually. So basically they used to throw it on a film or throw it on a cloth and then paint over it and things like that. So it was basically a great tool for artists and creative people. The next thing what happened was, now we talk about how from camera obscura we came to modern day photography. So camera obscura was invented somewhere in 1021 1021, yeah, 1021. So we are talking about 1000 years back. So then what came was the camera obscura was pretty heavy and it was a pretty hefty machine. So what they did was they had to reduce it. So that happened in 1685. Now you can understand, for a single for a simple modification to happen, it took them almost 600 years. That shows that nobody actually gave so much of importance to photography and camera at that point of time. Because you see today, every year two phones gets updated, iPhone, Samsung, you talk about any company, they upgrade their system so fast because that's the need. That time, you from here it gets to you'll get to know that that time it was not so much of a requirement, it was more of of a hobby, so it was not given so much of importance. So it took them 600 years just to reduce a camera obscura by a small portable device. So that it came out in 1685, the first portable camera. Then we spoke about this particular image when we are talking about architectural photography, and this is an image of Legras in 1826. And the world's first photograph, we can term it as a world's first photograph. The next one is daguerreotype, which basically spoke about creating films. So the next came up to wet emulsion plates, and that came out in 1851. Then because it was wet emulsion and there was a lot of liquid and things like that, the next thing that came out was a wet dry what came out is a dry plates in 1871. Then in 1888, mark this year, in 1888, Kodak starts selling the first commercial camera, and it was the first camera which sold over 1 million copies, 1 million copies of camera. So that is where the photography actually got into the daily life, and people started looking at photography as a must have element. So Kodak sells it first, and at that point of time it was more of amateur photography. That means people could not change much of the settings, people could not change much of the things that's there in the camera. Even Kodak had a timeline back in the days saying that you just click and we do the rest. So that was the tagline to commercialize their particular product. That means it was so easy to use that you don't have to understand the mechanics, nothing, you just click and we'll do the rest. So that was Kodak in 1888. Then as we spoke about how photography got into how photography got so popular is through war photography and photojournalism that we spoke in last class. And that is when people could actually see the importance, the requirement of photography, the need of a photographer, and the things that a photography can do. Because when you are in war, your relatives or your family members are in war, you want to know what's happening there. And even a single picture from that particular place means a lot. You can imagine a lot of things, you can get a lot of stories, you can see the faces and things like that. So war photography is something, actually the photojournalism, which got camera into the prime focus. So the next one comes out to a Polaroid introduces the first instant camera. So basically you can take a camera and the image comes out. You must have seen this there. There are still some lying around these days. Then in 1977, Kodak Konica releases the compact camera. So basically that is when from this side camera obscura, now you have a how do you say, instrument that you can put it in your pocket, or hang it in your belt. You must have seen your granddad, your dad carrying such kind of cameras, because that is what was there at that point of time. I was fortunate enough to have my dad's roll camera. We still do have it, and it was from Kodak, and it used to have just 36 films, and that's all you have got. So let's say, for example, if there is a birthday party is coming or something like that, we will get a new film, and my dad will teach me how to put that reel into the camera, and then we can just take photographs, but just 36. So you have to really wait, and it taught you patience, because you cannot just go click click click. Then you are done with the camera lens in, maybe 10-15 minutes. You have to wait for it to for the thing. So only when the cake cutting is coming, you will take a photograph. You'll ask the family to gather, you will take a photograph. So you have to plan. It was not like digital that you can just click 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 all the time. So the next is then the first professional digital camera comes out in 1991. That is also by Kodak. So Kodak was actually ruling this until and unless Canon then kicks in and produces the first digital camera. And then things change, and today, from 2000 1990s, late 1990s to 2000, then we have this mobile cameras which have almost taken up the entire photography business. So now what we are going to talk about it, what happens when we click. Now we spoke about just a brief about the photography. I mean, photography has a huge history behind it. If you want to know about each of these camera, you have to really get into it. You have to understand Robert Capa's how do you say invention into camera, and how things changed from dry plate to from wet plate to dry plate to digitalization, and how things have changed. And but now what we need to know is, when we click, we just press the shutter button, what happens to the camera? What exactly does the camera does what? So for that, as I said last time, I'll show you the section through a camera. So as I said, we'll be talking about the exposure triangle, and this is what the section through the camera looks like. Now, if you need to understand not the whole part, but basically I got this from one of the place called Quora, and this explains the camera in a very simplistic form with whatever we want to know about. So basically, the red line with the arrows is the light. So the light enters your camera through the lens. The first part, one, is the lens. Then it gets hit on a reflex mirror, which is like this, right? So it hits this as it hits, because the mirror is inclined, it reflects the light to the top. On top there is a pentaprism. This is what I was talking about. There's a pentaprism which reflects the light again, and it comes to the eyepiece. Now when you look at the eyepiece, what you are seeing is a twice reflected light that you saw in the eyepiece, right? Now what happens? Now this is all, so whatever is there, the light, whatever is there, the scenery, the landscape, the lion, whatever you are seeing it through the lens, hitting the particular mirror, then hitting the pentaprism, and then the light. So how does it get recorded? The next slide talks about that. So basically what happens is, the mirror, the mirror that was there just lifts up, and there is a photosensitive material right behind it. So if you can see this is the photosensitive material that is behind, and this mirror, which was like this, just lifted. Okay, so I'll just go back. You see over here, look at this particular position of the mirror. Over here, look at the position of the mirror. So what happens was, when you click, that means you are ready to click the photograph. What happens was, the mirror just got up, and the light directly fell onto the sensitive film, and whatever the light got, it got recorded, and that is the picture that you see. So basically that is the picture, you see it in the preview in a digital camera. Okay, so as I said, like I said, I have a mirrorless camera over here. What does a mirrorless camera does? So basically, when you talk about a DSLR camera, there is a mirror inside. That is why you look at it. This is a pretty slim body, right? Almost like a bridge camera. But in a DSLR camera, what happens is there is a mirror inside. That's why it's so hefty. But in a mirrorless camera, what happens is this mirror is not there. This particular mirror, which actually reflects it to the eye view and then back, that is not there. So what happens is, what you see over here directly, the light directly falls on the sensor all the time, and when you click, it just records it. That is why this is an advancement in camera. So that is why mirrorless camera cost almost like twice or thrice as much as the DSLR, beginner DSLR cameras. So that is what mirrorless camera, and the difference between a mirrorless camera and DSLR camera is. So next we will talk about the sensor size. Now we spoke about this particular things. Yeah, so we spoke about this particular things last time, and we were talking about different types of cameras. We started from mobile camera to compact, then we spoke about bridge camera, then we spoke about DSLR, then we spoke about full frame DSLR and things like that. So basically, one or two things that I want you guys to realize over here is when we look at this particular chart, if you see the sensor size, you see the sensor name on top, that is the name of the camera. So medium format, full frame, APS-H, APS-C, 4x3, 1 inch, and so on. So basically what you see is the sensor size will increase from mobile to medium format. At the same time, the crop factor will decrease from from medium format to mobile. So basically, sensor size is inversely proportional to crop factor. The bigger the sensor you have, the better the picture you will get, the lesser the crop factor will be. Now, sometimes we also might want to know what exactly is a crop factor. So basically, I'll give you the example of a full frame camera. Like what I have is a mirrorless full frame. So in a mirrorless full frame camera, the crop factor is 1. That means whatever I click on the photos and whatever I get is in 1:1 ratio. That means there is nothing missing out. Whatever I'm seeing in the eyepiece, I'm clicking, I'm getting the same photograph, right? Most of you will be having it, the DSLR, most of you guys have up to 80, 85, 90,000 is all APS-C. So basically it will have a crop factor, and in APS-C the crop factor is 1.52. So basically the ratio between what I see and what I get is 1.5. That means what I see, if I'm seeing so much, when I'll take the photograph, it will just come this much. Okay, it will crop a little bit of it, and this cropping factor increases. In compact, the cropping factor is almost 4.3. In mobile, it's almost 7.6. And the maximum that we see these days, the normally people use is a full frame camera, and which has a crop factor of 1. There is also something which is known as a pro DSLR or a medium format camera, where the crop factor is 0.64. That means it gives you more than even your eye can see. But again, as I said last time, it costs a lot, mostly 12 to 15 lakhs per camera. So you do not see that often a medium format camera as much as you see a full frame or APS-C camera. So basically, most of the DSLR that you see people out using is APS-C DSLR. Some of them might be a full frame DSLR, or you might be seeing a mirrorless full frame DSLR like the one I own. So that is what talks about the sensor size and the crop factor. So the crop factor is inversely proportional to the sensor size. Bigger the sensor size, better the image, pricier the camera is, lesser the crop factor is. So that's the formula that you can remember. The next one is, now we come into choosing the modes. What are the right modes that are there in a camera? What are the modes that are there in the camera? Why do we use those modes? What are the modes used for? And different needs and characteristics of the modes. So basically, when you talk about the dial modes, now we already know in a camera what exactly is a dial. So we spoke about this. This is the dial, right? Located on top of the camera for quick access to camera mode. So you can just shift this to change from one dial to another. You might have a lot of options in a dial depending on what camera you are using. The ones that you are holding might have 10 to 12. The one I am holding has only 7 to 8. So there might be dial mode, but there will be at least this 6 dial modes that will be there for sure. And that's auto, that's the program mode, that's the aperture mode, that's the shutter speed mode, that's the manual mode, and that's the no flash mode. So this will be there in your camera no matter which camera you use. And then it differs from camera to camera to add additional modes to it. Like some of them might have a macro mode, some of them might have a sports mode built into it. If it is there, it's good enough. If it is not, you can change your shutter speed. And so basically the mode is a more like a preset that you have in your camera. So As I said, from here onwards, if you can keep your camera with you, it will be much helpful for you because you can literally change the things and know what it is, what it talks about. So first we will talk about the most common mode in digital photography. That's auto mode. uh, by the way, from here onwards we will be talking about only digital photography, and aren't talking about manual, how do you say, the real cameras, okay? Because there the whole physics and things, the way it changes is completely different than the digital. So here onwards we'll be talking about digital. And now let's talk about the auto mode. Okay, so when we talk about the auto mode, what it is actually, it's first of all very convenient to pick up and go, right? You want to take a photograph, you do not know much about the camera and things like that, but you really want, the whole point of a photography is to capture moment. So if you want to capture a moment pretty fast, and you do not have your camera knowledge, you do not know which mode does what, so auto is the one you can go for, right? The camera sets up whatever the best thing is depending on the light and shadow and things like that and whatnot, and you take the photograph. The aim of this particular thing is to correct the exposure every time, right? So what it does is, if the light is too less, it will automatically increase the exposure. If the light is too much, it will automatically decrease the exposure. So it's basically a very good mode to fall back on if you do not have control over how much light should I set in or things like that. Anyone can use it, from kids to people with 60, 70. People who are 60, 70, they can use it. No control over the exposure at all, so you do not have to really worry about how much light is getting into the camera because the camera does it for you. And no creative control. That also means that you will not have any creative control over here. That means you won't have a say on whether you want to focus here, whether you want to focus there, whether you want to keep something out of focus. No, it will just do what it is meant to do. And it's although auto mode does a lot of low light photography, but it is not known for a low light photos. That means if you really go into the low light area, what it will do is most of the time it will just pop up the flash and take a photograph. So if you want something which is dark and dingy and still want to take a photograph, so you want the viewer to, look for it in the photograph, what you want to emphasis on, auto is not the particular mode. Auto is not the mode that will do that. Okay, so that's about auto. So then next one is program mode. So on your cameras it is denoted by P. Set your dial to P and it will talk about program mode right now. So basically this is the stepping stone to controlled DSLR usage. So what happens is, by doing that, now you are almost in a semi-auto mode. That means it still controls a lot of thing on its own, but now you have got a control over the exposure. So it will still set the shutter speed for you, it will still set the ISO for you, but you can set the exposure how much you want. So basically it's almost like, not letting you ride the whole bike on your own, but still someone is holding you from back. So it's something like that. That's program sorry Yeah, that's program mode. So you can adjust one part of the exposure and the camera will adjust the other part. So this is more like a stepping stone towards understanding cameras and doing a full control. So these days you guys are lucky that you guys have this as SD cards, and they can take hundreds of photographs together. So you can actually go and start experimenting with these cameras. You can set your modes to whatever you guys want and then click photographs, change the settings, click photographs again, see what difference it got you. See when you increase the exposure what happens, see when you decrease the exposure what happens. If you don't like the photograph, you anyway can delete it. You are not paying for the reels like you know people used to before. You can just delete the photographs. But it's important for you to spend that much of time with your camera. um, the more you spend your time with your camera, the more you get to know your camera well, the faster you get to how do you say, set your cameras when you are out in the field. Because when you're out in the field, it's more like you are on the war, so you do not have time to change yourself, adapt yourself and things like that. You cannot experiment over there. So it's better you spend time and take time to know your camera when you are at home, or these days is the best time. So that's what program mode does. The next mode that we are talking about is shutter speed. Now the photograph that you have, it's from photographylive.com. The photograph that you have has uh, reduced the shutter speed. Okay, now I'll tell you about what you mean by reducing shutter speed and what do you mean by increasing shutter speed. Let's say, for example, if something is going really fast, all right, what do? You want to click it fast, right? So what you do is you increase the shutter speed. That means the mirror that we were talking about in the camera, the DSLR, the particular mirror that was there, inclined mirror, it flips very fast. Okay, so sometimes it can flip in even 1/10 of a second, done, and it just took the photograph, right? So sometimes you can reduce the shutter speed, which also means that the camera, that particular mirror, will lift, wait for some time, then come back, right? So in that, what happens when you have a high shutter speed, where do you use it? You use it only to, let's say, take photographs of cars, take photographs of cheetah, take photographs of fast moving objects. Then you do the shutter speed as high shutter speed. At the same time, if you have low shutter speed, that means the things that are moving fast will be blurry, right? Now you can use this to your creative advantage. When you are taking photographs like this, what you can do is you can lower the shutter speed so that the water is falling in this particular thing. The water is falling at quite a lot of speed, but if you lower the shutter speed, it's obviously not going to focus on each of the water format, right? So what it is going to do is it will give you a very blurry kind of water, and that gives you this particular effect, right? There are other filters that you can use, like there are cheat codes in games. There are other filters like AND filters that you can use to get such blurry image, but with shutter speed it is possible. So basically, shutter speed kind of controls the motion of the particular photograph. So if you have fast moving objects, if you have slow moving object, you will set your shutter speed accordingly, whether you want it to be fast or whether you want it to be slow. So that depends on you. And also sometimes, let's say for example, in this particular stream, the water was flowing at particular quite a lot of speed. If you use a faster shutter speed, it will give you the photograph, but the photograph might not have this effect. So it makes much more sense to reduce the shutter speed and then to take the photograph so that you get that blurry image style in it. The next talks about, again, we'll talk about this. So basically, again, it's a semi-auto mode where the you control the shutter speed, the camera controls rest of it. So the camera controls the exposure, the camera controls the ISO, the brightness level, everything. You control just the shutter speed, nothing else, right? So shutter speed mode will give you a control over just shutter speed part of it. So you can set the shutter speed, the amount of time you require, basically the amount of time you want your shutter to be open at and then close. If you want it to be fast, it will just close in 1/10 of a second. You can keep it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Some of the time you might have seen something which is known as astrophotography. I don't know how many of you have known about it. If you look at astrophotography, they keep the shutter speed open overnight, right? Overnight, almost for 6 hours, 5 hours, the shutter speed was open. That means you clicked, right? When you click, what happened? One sound comes and the photograph has been done, right? In astrophotography, if you're taking a photograph, you just say click, the photograph opens and it will close after 6 hours. So for 6 hours, the next 6 hours, it will just record whatever is happening. So you will see a star, a moon moving like this and things like that. And that entire thing, all of that will be seen in your photograph. After 6 hours, you'll get that photograph. So that's astrophotography. Again, that is one more trick you can do with shutter speed. You can try it out, although astrophotography requires a lot of knowledge about the way the stars are going to move and where you should position your camera. But there are a lot of YouTube videos if you want to just start with astrophotography. It's a very exciting kind of photography. It requires a lot of patience. You might have to sleep over it the whole night. You might have to keep making sure that the setup is not disturbed or something like that. But after 6 hours, you'll just get one photograph, but that photograph will be worth it. So that's again shutter speed. So great to experiment, and control is still limited because you just have the control over your shutter speed and nothing else. And careful about the camera shake. Now what I'm saying is, because when you and camera shake only in low shutter speed, not in high shutter speed, you don't have to worry because the camera has taken the photographs already. But in a low shutter speed, what happens is if you're taking the photograph and the camera is recording, still recording for 2 hours, 3 hours, or maybe 20 minutes, if you shake it, or if the camera shakes, then the whole photography frame is shaken. So then what you'll get is the whole photograph, when you see, the entire photograph would have shaken. So you require a tripod, and you have to make sure that the camera doesn't shake, especially if you're trying out astrophotography. Then you have to make sure nothing around moves, because the camera and the photograph just have to be like this to understand that the entire stars and moon and everything has moved. It has to stay stable. So you have to be very careful about the camera shake when you're taking photographs in low light photography, or in low shutter speed photography. The next one is we are talking about is aperture priority. Now this is something where there is this terminology known as depth of field, DOF, and there is also a terminology which is known as bokeh, BOKEH. Okay, some call it bokeh, some call it bouquet. So bokeh, basically this will control the amount of light that's coming in and the focal length. The focal length means where you want to focus and what you want out of focus. For example, in this particular photograph that you are seeing on your screen, you can see that the focus is on the eye of that particular model, and the grass or whatever the things are in front have been blurred out. Okay, and whatever is behind is also blurred out. So what you are seeing is nothing but just the model. So that is what is actually talking about the aperture priority. See, with the same picture, you can have different kinds of background. You can have a background which is less blurry. You can have a background which is completely faded out. So this you can do with aperture control. So the A in your camera mode can do this. So you can decide how much you want the background to blur, and also where do you want to focus on. Accordingly, the camera takes a call. So again, it's another semi-auto mode. Still, the camera hasn't given you the entire control, or you haven't taken the entire control from the camera. You are talking about just the aperture value, the AV. Okay, and you can set the aperture, the lens opening size. Now this is where the lens opening size comes into the picture, because you will see while buying lens that the lower the aperture value is, the pricier the lens gets. Let's say, for example, if you're buying a 85 which is a block lens, we'll talk about the lens in detail right after the camera gets over. So if you're talking about lens in detail, what happens is you want the lens to perform good even in low light condition. If you want the lens to perform good in low light condition, you want the lens to be wide open, or the opening to be more, so that it can get in more light, right? So that even it can perform good in low light condition. That means the aperture value needs to be very less. So the aperture value is inversely proportional to the opening of the lens. The less the aperture value is, the higher the opening value is. The higher the opening value is, the better it can do in low light photography, or the depth of field, DOF. Okay, so controlling the aperture controls and depth of field. And great way to learn aperture is to see DOF in action. That means just start taking photographs in aperture mode of very small objects, just a bottle somewhere, just a plant somewhere, just a cat somewhere, and see how to blur out the background, how much to blur out the background. You must have seen some photographs will have this tiny dots behind, which will be in blur. That is called as bokeh. So you can even try out that if there is some light condition which is behind and you are focusing on something, some object, the behind will get blurred out, and that is known as bokeh. So it can be difficult to understand at the starting, what to blur out, how much to blur out, should I blur out this much, should I overdo it? You must have seen some mobile photographs really overdo this DOF. First DOF came into picture, which was known as portrait mode in iPhone 7. Now, when iPhone 7 come out, Apple introduced the DOF mode in phone cameras, and they called it portrait mode. So what it does, it just focuses you and blur out the rest of the background. Some Chinese company did copy that particular concept, but they could not do it well enough. That is why sometimes you see the background blurred out so much that it looks artificial. It almost looks like Photoshop. So it is important to know how much do you want to blur out the background. You have a control over it. You should not overdo it. At the same time, you should not be like, you don't know what is getting blurred and how much is getting blurred. We'll go to the next. So the next one now comes to M, and M is full manual mode, which means you have the complete control, which also means you have three things to control at once. That means you'll be controlling the ISO, you'll be controlling the shutter speed, as well as you'll be controlling the aperture. So all three together, you have the entire control over your camera, and that's manual mode. So the camera doesn't make any decision. Uh, it gets really annoying for beginners to use manual mode directly. I have seen some of my students directly going to manual mode and clicking photographs, and they don't know what they're clicking because they are not setting anything. They're just clicking. You should be doing it in auto mode and not in manual mode, because in manual mode you need to control the three aspects of the photography. You need to control the shutter speed, you need to control the aperture, and you also need to control the ISO. Okay, so this gives you a complete control. That means you are creatively and technically completely independent, or you are completely on your own. You will tell the camera what to do. The camera will not set anything for you. Like in shutter speed mode, it was only the shutter speed that you are checking out, but rest of it was taken care of by the camera. Over here, not gonna happen. It will completely give you the entire independence, and you have to choose what you want to do with all three aspects of it. And for professional photographers, or for photographers who have a little control over the camera, this is the most satisfying mode to use. Because let's say, for example, if you are a rider, you do not want someone to hold your bike when you're riding, right? It gets very annoying. So it's best when they leave you and you are riding on your own. You feel you feel the satisfaction. It's the similar way. Once you know the entire camera mode, you would not like the camera to hold you back with your aperture or with your shutter speed, or just tell you, you do the shutter speed, I'll do the aperture, and things like that. You don't want all that. You want your full control. And that's why I tell you, the manual mode is the most difficult mode to master over, but it is also the most satisfying mode to use. So all of you should just um, start aiming for manual mode. If that is the stepping stone into your professional level photography, if you want to be a photographer, that is the stepping stone. Now, the next we will talk about other common modes. As I said, the camera might have n number of modes in it, but we'll be talking about certain modes first, and then the mode that we spoke about right now: auto, program mode, shutter speed, aperture, and manual. These five modes are the basic mode that you'll find in any camera, any bridge camera, mirrorless, APS-C, full frame, any camera that you are looking at. You will find this five modes for sure. Other than this, you might have these modes. These are the common modes that you might have. In my full frame mirrorless, I do not have any of these modes. That means that my camera doesn't have a preset for all this. But you might have, especially bridge cameras will have tons of modes in it. So it sets almost, as I said, bridge camera is almost like an all-rounder. So it almost sets every mode, every preset for your camera. So let's say, for example, we can talk about macro, as we have spoken about macro photography last time. So you can set your camera to macro, and it will preset the settings in the camera, which is best to take up photographs in very close distance. The next one is sports. So basically what the camera will do is it will set your shutter speed really high so that you can take fast moving objects. That means the camera can capture. Then there is portrait, which again is basically twisting and turning the aperture so that you get the best depth of field. One thing you can clearly see over here, these common modes are doing nothing but just treating these three particular things that we were talking about: ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. Nothing else. They don't do anything extra. They just do a little bit of preset of give you a little customized thing. But this is not required. Even if you do not have this, you can do almost everything. And if you are using full control mode, the full manual mode, you don't even have to worry about all this. So the next one is landscape, again, to give you the best setting to use the shallow depth of field, basically to give you a kind of how do you say, the kind of bouquet and things like that, so that the background is blurred out and you get what you want to focus on. The next one is camera. This is very common in panorama, which is very common in phone cameras. You can take photographs which is horizontally pretty long, and you can stitch them together. The next one talks about night portrait. So basically, in this, the camera does good in low light photographs. So if the light is really less, it will do pretty well in that, which also means that it'll just increase the aperture level. That's all, nothing else. It'll let the lens get more light into it. Simple. Then there are this creative autos, C1s, CAs. You'll have, I have something known as C1, C2, C3. That means it's giving me three subjects or three presets that I can set according to me. Let's say, for example, if I'm a photojournalist, I want some kind of black and white photograph with this, then I can set it. So let's say, for example, if things are having really fast, I want a certain kind of photograph like that, I can just go to C1 and take photographs. That's all, nothing else. So, and these are the customs. Okay, so that's all about the camera. So now, next, this was half the presentation that we spoke about. We spoke about the cameras, we spoke about the modes and things like that. And next, over here, now we will move on to lenses. So now, till now we were talking about this part of the camera, which is the body of the camera. Now we will talk about the different lenses are possible and things like that. So by the end of this particular module, you will know the entire machine, what it is and how it is. Meanwhile, I think we have already spoken for almost an hour, more than an hour right now. So do you have any questions for me? I'd like to take up whatever questions if you guys have any. I'll just stop the sharing for some time. If you have any questions, anyone, so maybe you guys can just message or chat on the group and tell me if you have any questions. Any questions till now? I hope I'm audible. Rohit, can you hear me? Hello? Hello? I think it's Nilanjana speaking, right? Nilanjana, can you, am I audible to you people?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes. So maybe if you have any questions, anyone, if you have any questions, you can put for this camera. We will move to lens right after this.
We can hear you very well, Amit.
Yes, ma'am. I'm just waiting for them. If they have any questions on camera, then I'll move to the second module, the lens part.
Students, you can unmute yourself and speak, ask question.
Okay. I guess then I take it that you guys have understood the whole camera part. If at all you get any questions, you guys can wait. Once I finish up the lens, I have a small quiz for you today also. So 3-4 questions over there. And then we can talk about, if you have any questions by then, if you have framed any questions in your mind, you can shoot and I'll answer them. So we will move on to the next part of it, and that will talk about the next module, and which is lenses. Now, if camera in a whole photography system, if camera is the brain, the lens is the eye. So basically the light that comes through the lens, and what gets processed in the brain, that is in the camera body. So when we talk about this, we talk about the sensor lenses. So even in lenses there are these sensors, right? So when we talk about in this particular image that you can see how the sensor sizes have is there in a smartphone and a compact camera, then to 1 inch, that is a larger sensor compact cameras, and then there is micro four thirds, then there is APS-C, full frame, and medium format. What it is talking about is the sensor size that is behind, right? When we're talking about the introduction to photography, you remember I told you about three things that is more important from photography point of view. One is time, one is the light, and another was the sensor. So now we are talking about the sensor, and we are talking about the light which can come to the sensor. So now when we talk about this, why do you feel, you know, the full frame cameras are so expensive? The full frame cameras are expensive is mainly because you have this one crop factor ratio. So what we mean by one crop factor ratio is, as you can see, the crop factor will reduce as the sensor size will increase. So when you have a bigger sensor size, that means the lens and everything can take a bigger sensor size, which also means that the crop factor will reduce. That means if you're taking a photograph of some scenery or some landscape outside, what you see, you get that if your crop factor is 1, which is in a full frame. What you see, you get 1.5 times less of that is 1.5 crop factor, which is mostly in a APS-C. So in a APS-H, it is 1.29. On the left side, you can see the values of the graph. So you can see in full frame, the crop factor is 1. In APS-H, it is 1.29. If in APS-C, it's 1.5, in 4/3 it's 2, and in CX camera means the cameras that we use in a compact camera, or these days even the phone cameras, the crop factor is 2.7. Okay, so that is the working of it. That is the working of a lens. Now when we talk about a full frame, usually this talks about 36 mm. That means the sensor size is 36 mm, 3.6 centimeter, and 3.6 centimeter by 23.9 mm, so it's almost like 2.4 centimeter. So that is all the sensor is there. Let's say, for example, right now I have a full frame with me. This is a full frame camera which has a crop factor of 1. That means whatever I'll click, whatever I will see, if I click, I get the same image. No cropping is done by the camera. And in this, the camera sensor will be placed somewhere right behind this. There is a camera sensor which is 3.5 centimeter by 2.4 centimeter size, and the lens gets mounted on top of that. So the light enters the lens and goes directly to the sensor. As I said, in a mirrorless, like the one I have, there is no mirror in it. In a DSLR, there will be a mirror on top of that. So what you see is mirror, pentaprism, and you. That is what you see. So a full frame sensor refers to a 35 mm sensor size. All focal lengths mentioned in the lesson will be based on your sensor size. Okay, always sure to check lens compatibility of your camera before you buy it. A lot of time I have seen my students making mistake. Very rarely they do this, but there have been some people which who have made this mistake and it has costed them. They do not check if the camera lens is compatible. Let's say, for example, in a full frame, the camera lens system of a full frame is completely different than a camera lens system of a APS-C. You have to check what camera do you have. Do you have a full frame camera or do you have a APS-C camera? Then you have to check what lens are you buying, because it will be specifically written that this lens is for cameras of full frame range. This lens will be for crop factor lens. Okay, so most of you will be buying APS-C mode cam. Most of you will be having I believe APS-C camera. If you have a APS-C camera, that means you will be having APS-C lens. Now in an APS-C lens, the threshold starts from 18 mm, 18 mm. But in a full frame camera, the threshold starts from 24 mm. So can anyone tell me why? If you see in full frame camera, the crop factor is 1, but in APS-C, the crop factor is 1.5. So if you see 24 and 18, you will see that 1.5 ratio coming into the picture. So that is why in a crop sensor, you will have 18 to 130 mm, 18 to 50 mm, 55 mm, 18 to 135 mm, 18 to 90 mm. In a full frame camera, you will see 24 to 40 mm, 24 to 50 mm, 24 to 85 mm, 90 mm, and so on. So the lenses just gets add on. So basically you have to, while choosing your lens, you first have to see what camera do you possess. Do you have a full frame or do you have a APS-C? Accordingly, you buy the lens that you require. The next point talks about the lens components. Now, just like we spoke about the camera and we spoke about the camera components, now let us speak about the lens components. I know this particular lesson will be a little boring because it's completely technical. But if you are stepping into a professional photography area, you require to know all this. Until and unless you know all this, then you are just fiddling with something that you do not understand, and that doesn't give you the entire control. Our point is to get whole control of the camera so that we can do what we want with the camera. So bear with me for this technicalities, and those who have a DSLR, you guys are blessed with a DSLR, take full advantage of this class, because by this, if you know all of this, then you can start experimenting right away. So basically, first type of lens we'll talk about is zoom lenses. Now in zoom lenses, it's basically any lens with a variable changeable focal length is considered as a zoom lens. That means uh, the camera that I have right now, it is not a zoom lens, it is a block lens, or we call it as a prime lens. That means over here it is written 85 mm. That means the focal length of this lens is fixed at 85 mm, which also means if I want to zoom somewhere or if I want to zoom out from somewhere, I have to move myself. My zoom won't work. I don't even, if I, this is a lens hood, I do not even have a zoom dial. The dial that you see over here is a focus dial. See, there is no other dial, right? In the picture that is there on your screen, you can see there are two dials, one in the back, which is the zoom dial. The next one is in little in front, which is also the focus dial. So you can change your autofocus or manual focus like we spoke in the lens, and you accordingly you will get the zoom dial or the focus dial to control. In a block lens, that is not possible. So I do not have a zoom dial. What a zoom lens does is nothing but changes the focal length of a lens. So basically, you are telling the lens where to focus. If you want the lens to focus somewhere in the farther, the lens will move. That means the lens will extend and it will focus somewhere in far. If you want the zoom lens to focus somewhere nearby, you reduce the zoom, the focal length comes back and it focuses over there. So basically, zoom refers to a lens's ability to zoom in and zoom out. That's all. Okay, it does not necessarily mean it is used for far away objects. Sometimes you do not even have to use zoom for far away objects. You might want to take a close-up of something. So always zoom lenses is not for far away. You can also take close-ups with it. The next, which is known as, which we have, which I have over here, is the 85 mm prime lens. So this is called as fixed lenses or prime lenses. So basically it has a fixed focal length. That means I cannot zoom with it. But this also means that the mm in millimeter range does not change. That means this particular thing, I do not have, a ring to change. What I have is just the focal length. You might be saying, so why do we need a prime lens? We can very well do with a focal length. The thing is, it's a trade-off that you do. Prime lenses are best for aperture control. That means if I have a prime lens where I do not have the capability to zoom, I will have the opportunity to get really low, how do you say, aperture value. Which in my case, it is just 1.4, right? In a zoom lens, you might not get that much of aperture. In a zoom lens, you might get up to 2.8 to 3.5, something like that. You won't get that low aperture value in a zoom lens. So it depends on the kind of photography you do. I do a lot of portrait photography. I do a lot of street photography. For that, I can move around, but I want the image to be very crisp, the image to come very, very static. And I want a very good depth of field. Just now I spoke about, as I said, the aperture control. The lower the aperture value is, I told you that more DOF or more depth of field you will get, or more better bokeh you will get. So that is why prime lenses are usually used. One is to create a very crisp image. Two, it can do wonders in low light photography. I can take photograph up to, let's say, 6 o'clock in a summer, 6:30, almost 7 o'clock. I can take photographs with my camera, whereas a zoom lens will not be able to take photographs post, I think, 5 or something like that. So zoom lens, because of its less aperture control, it will not be able to take photographs in low light condition, but a prime lens can. So it completely depends. Again, if you are a wildlife photographer, you will obviously not go for prime lens because you don't want to go that close to the tiger to click him. You want to stay far away. You want the lens to do all the how do you say, all the thing that for you to zoom a really far object. So obviously you will use a zoom lens at that point of time. And for portrait photography, fashion photography, street photography, documentaries, prime lenses are really good because you can move. The only thing is you have to move, and sometimes it is not considered as a negative point because we have the zoom ability. A lot of time what we do is we just sit at one point and we zoom, although we can reach there, but we can just zoom and see because we get lazy, and we are ready to compromise with the composition. With a prime lens, you do not have the ability to zoom. So all you have to do is, if you want to take any photograph, if you want to do something, you have to walk. And that also gives you the chance to compose your photos much better way, because anyway you are moving, you will do the best to compose your photographs. Even if it means moving a tiny inch, you will do it. In a zoom, you will just take the photograph somehow. So it has its plus and minus. So basically that is what I'm not trying to tell you which lens is good or which lens is not. It completely depends on the user and the genre of photography you are doing. But what I would like to tell you is, if you are using a fixed lens, make sure that you have a lens with a good aperture value or a very less aperture value, which means you'll have more versatile lens. And if you are having a zoom lens, then check the zoom that you require. Don't just go and buy a 100 to 400 mm lens just to take rabbit photographs. You don't need that. You have to understand what zoom range are you looking at. Okay, so basically now we will talk about the various types of lens components. So now if I just grab onto my camera, or if you have your camera, just keep your camera around, you will know there is something known as a lens cap. So basically the cap which protects the lens. This is basically the lens cap. So you put it back and it will protect the lens. There is something also known as a lens hood. This is the lens hood. So basically we mount it on top of the lens, and this is not to extend the lens. This basically cuts down the direct sunlight or any how do you say, indirect light that may have problem with the light which is entering your lens, so because of which we use that. I see a lot of people using lens hood at night, let's say in the evening. I don't understand, because what are you trying to cut down, right? So you can understand that they don't know much about the lens hood usage. Okay, so when in the evening or something, when you do not have any other light, you can just either put it back in a different way so that it comes back, or you can just take it out and just take the photographs as it is when you are in a low light condition. It's only when during the noon or afternoon, when you have strong light from everywhere, or let's say for example you are taking photograph at a concert or something where there is a focus light and it's focusing, then you can use the focus. It's just like a cap. It's just like a cap that you wear. So you don't wear a cap in the evening, you wear a cap when it's sunny. So it's just like that. The lens hood does the same thing. And there is this autofocus and manual focus switch that you will have. I do not have that because it's a prime camera again. And you will have it at distance scale. So you can, that is the focus length you can see. Again, the zoom ring that you have, and it will show you the current. There will be a dot on your camera lens, which will show you at what focal length are you in. When you're moving, the camera link will move and the measurement will also move, so you know at what focal length you are. 18 mm, 14 mm, 15 18 mm, 20 mm, 24 mm, where are you. Then there is a lens rear cap. So if I take out the lens, when the lens I bought, when there was a cap behind also, because lenses have a multiple number of mirrors in it. So there is a lens cap at the complete behind the bottom rear part of also. Then aperture info is written over here. If you can see this, there is 1.4. It's written AF 85 1.4 FE. So 85 is the focal length, 85 mm. 1.4 FE is basically the aperture value of my lens. Similarly, you check out the lens that you guys have and check out the mm that is there. If you have a zoom, it will tell you not just one value, it will tell you two values. So it will be either 24 to 50 or 18 to 55 or 55 to 200, something like that. That is the focal length value. And f 3.5 to 4 or 2.5 to something, that is the focal, that is the aperture value. So that's all we are talking about. And when you see the front of the lens, you have a focal length, again you will be written over here. Okay, and then you have a thread for the filter. So what I am using right now, you can see here what I'm going to take out over here. This is known as a filter. So it's basically on top of your lens. The lens already has a mirror. This is a filter. Okay, so you put that on top of this. Now the filter, there are different kinds of filter. What I am using is basically to protect my camera lens. The protect my camera lens's mirror. Okay, usually you use it to filter something out. For me, since I wanted a very clear image, I have used UV filter. So this is a UV filter by Hoya, which is 77 mm. So you have to check what are the thread. Every lens has a different thread value, and according to the thread value, you will get your filter. The filters are not universal. You won't get one filter for all the lenses, because the lens size will increase or decrease. The filter size will also increase or decrease. So always check for what filter do you require. For in my case, it is a Hoya of 77 filter that I am using on top of my lens. So if you are getting a lens, or if you have a lens which is, let's say for example, 15 to 50, 18 to 55 is the most common lens that you use. You will have to check on the internet what for that particular company lens of 18 to 55, what particular thread size do you require the filter to. And there are a lot of kinds of filter. There is AND filter, there is black and white filter, there are filters which you can put, and all the photos that you will take will be in black and white, although you can do it post processing. But if you want directly take black and white, you can put such filters. So filter is basically something that you use to filter out something, right? So in my case, if you don't want to filter out anything, you can filter out UV light, because that's anyway not seen, right? So you can use a UV filter. But if you want to filter out the yellow part of it, so you can use a yellow filter, and what it will do is it will discard the yellow light and the other lights will come in. Similarly, black and white, AND filters, there are a lot of filters that you can use. The next one is the front lens element, and as I just spoke about, the lens hood. Okay, so that is all about the components of the lens. Now what we will talk about is the focal length. Now this is something where it gets technical. This is basically the distance where the photo becomes focused in the lens, measured from the cameras in an image sensor. Just like how I said it, it depends on what focal length do you want the image to focus on. The lower number of the to simplify, the lower the number, the wider the lens and the photos are, and the higher the number, the closer the lens and the photos are. Let's say for example, if you are talking about a 200 lens, that means it can go really far and fetch something. If you are using a 20 lens, that means it can come really close. So what happens when you come really close and take a photograph? You see a wide of it, you see wide range. So that when you have a small let's say for example, I'm talking about a 12 lens, it will be a wide angle lens. I'm talking about a 600 lens, it will be a telephoto lens or a zoom lens, which can actually go really far. So the higher the number, more it can zoom. Lower the number, more it can widen up, or less it can zoom, or more it can widen up. The next is again, I just brushed through this. It talks about the focal length explanation. Okay. And now we will talk about the image stabilizer. So basically, this is a technique that is reducing blurring. To reduce blurring, I just spoke about it. In Nikon, it's called as VR, vibration reducer. In Canon, it's IS, image stabilizer. You can on it or off it. I'll suggest you, if you are starting with your camera, then keep it on. But later on, also experiment by keeping it off, so that you know what kind of effect are you getting. With still camera shake is particularly problematic at slow shutter speed. Just as I told, let's say for example, if you are taking astro photography or things like that, you do not want your camera to move at all. So, or with a long focal length lens, let's say for example, if you are taking a 600 lens and you are focusing on something really far, you can do it with your phone cameras also. When you actually zoom in a lot, you really can't control a little bit of shake also can completely distort your image over here and there. Okay, so that is what happens with even the long focal length lenses. So again, the in-body stabilization, you don't have to really get into this, but I just thought, it's better to tell you about this. Optical stabilizers are found in the lens. They can be referred to either IS or VS or optical stabilization or VC. All right. In body is located at the image sensor. This means that any lens can be stabilized. This means this is also known as 3-axis or 5-axis stabilization. This is just talking about the stabilization, right? So lenses will display the widest aperture available to you. In this case, you can see it has written 3.5 to 5.6. Can you see over here? It is written 3.5 to 5.6. That's the aperture size that is available. 18 to 55 is the focal length. That means from 18 mm, the lens can go up to 55 mm. Yeah, that's it, I guess, because there are only two values that will be there. Not all lenses will have the same widest aperture because it again depends. As I said, prime lenses will have low aperture. That means they can do really good in night photography or low light photography. Whereas focal length, if you have a really high focal length, let's say for example, if you have a 400 mm lens, you might not get 1.4 how do you say 1.5 1.4 or 1.5 aperture. You will get something around 3.5 to 5 aperture. That means focal length with big lenses, the thing that you use, you might not be able to do any shooting post 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, because once the light gets a little dark, your lens will not be able to focus anywhere. It will just hunt and it will give you blurry images. Okay, so that is what we have been speaking about. The next one we are talking about is the lens hood. I just told you is just to block the sunlight or light source to prevent glare or lens flare. Now lens flare is something that you see in a image where there is an image and there will be this tiny dots or the colorful dots all over, and those are called lens flares. Now the next one is angular view. So when you are talking about a human focused angular vision is different from a lens focused angular vision. And I say that because of this. See, when you are talking about the lens, how it works, we can see a particular angle, right? But that is because our eyes are versatile. We can close up, we can go far, we can see macro, micro, everything. So that's the most versatile lens you have inbuilt in your body. But when we talk about the lens, we have to understand what it wants to capture. So as I said, if the angle of vision of the lens is somewhere from 114 degree, is more like 114 degree, then it's a extreme wide angle view. That means it can completely take photographs of very narrow spaces. All right. And that is where architecture also comes into picture. While taking interior photographs where you have cramped up spaces and things like that, you want to show most of it, you will use a wide lens, and that is what will cover 114 degree of a view. Similarly, as you come close to telephoto, the angle of vision will reduce. The length will increase, but the angle of vision will reduce. So for example, for a telephoto or a super telephoto, you might just have 6 inch. 6 inch is all you have. All right. And for a medium telephoto, you might have it as 28 inches. For wide angle, you might have it at 75 inches, right? And I think for extreme wide angle, you might get it as just 114 degree. So it depends on how much angle can you give. Sorry, I was talking about inches. It's not inches, it's in degrees. So basically for a super telephoto is just 4 degrees till extreme wide angle is 114 degrees. So that is the kind of thing. Now it depends on what you are clicking. If you are clicking architecture, you might be going somewhere in the wide angle range. If you are clicking, let's say something which is street photography, you will be going something from normal to medium telephoto range. So something from 50 mm to 100 mm. That is why the lens that you get is 18 mm to 55 mm. In APS-C, when you see, the normal lens that you get is 18 to 55, and then you will get a 55 to 200. So 55 to 200 is more like a telephoto lens, and 18 to 55 is a medium telephoto lens or a normal lens that you can use. So it depends on what thing that you want, what you want to click. Accordingly, you will take your particular lens. Just like you will take your camera according to your needs, you will have to take your lens according to your needs. So for general purpose, we usually use a 24 to 105 lens in a full frame camera. This is for all round use. You can use for everything. If you want to ask me, sir, what lens should I start with? If it is, by the way, 24 to 105 is for full frame cameras. So if you have, let's say, for example, DSLR, which is a APS-C, I will say start with 18 to 55 and a 55 to 135. Yeah. Or if you want, just you don't want to carry around too much, as I said, don't open your lens too many times. The first APS-C camera when I had bought back in 2014, a Canon DSLR, APS-C mode, it was not a full frame. I bought a 18 to 135 lens. So that almost did everything for me. I could click photographs in the zoo of Mysore. I can click photographs, landscape of Mangalore. I could click portraits of Devaraja Arts Road in Mysore. I could basically do almost everything with it. So if you have a camera which is a APS-C mode, just go for a 18 to 135 lens. It's more than enough for you to start and to survive for next 5-4 years. If you have a full frame camera, if you are that blessed to have a full frame camera right from the beginning, there is nothing like it. You can go for a 24 to 105 lens. Why I'm saying is it's an all-round lens. You can do almost everything with it. Later, like you once you realize what genre of photography you really into, then you can buy specific lenses. Let's say, for example, I had a 24 to 105 when I started with my full frame camera, but then I understood I enjoy clicking portrait photography more. So then I got a prime lens, which is just a 85 lens. Similarly, to start with, you can go with an all-round lens 24 to 105 and slowly see what you are really into, what you really like, and then buy specialized lenses. At the same time, although we are talking about the technicalities of camera and lenses, I'll suggest you again and again not to get too much not to spend too much onto camera and lenses at the beginning of your career. So basically, these are telephoto lens, can start from 70, can go up to 300. Really narrow field of view, as I said, just 4 degree to 8 degree to 4 degree is all you have. Uses for wildlife sports and typically higher prices than standard lenses, because this lens can cost you lakhs together. There are Sony lenses of 600 which are 4 lakhs, 5 lakhs altogether. So they are really expensive. Then next you have a super telephoto lens. So again, they are from 300 plus range. You must have seen some photographers, usually in when you see wildlife photographers, or when you see photographers that click cricket matches, you will see this huge white lenses. These are the one, super telephoto lenses. So they are very large, they are very heavy, and they'll require a tripod because they are shooting so far objects that a little shake can completely blur the image. So you will require a tripod. The next one is, I'll just tell you a rule of thumb. Okay, the rule of thumb is, when using a telephoto lens, shutter speed should match the focal length of the lens to avoid mistake. So if you are using a telephoto lens, if your shutter speed is 1 by, let's say for example, 250, make sure your focal length is the same. Then you can actually, for example, 200 lens should have a minimum of 1 by 200 to avoid the camera shake. So if you first check, let's say for example, in this case, I have a 85 lens. I should have the shutter speed as 1 by 85 minimum to avoid the camera shake. So that's a tip for you to start if you have a telephoto. So next we are talking about wide angle. This is something that are very expensive lenses, but they are very popular for architecture photography, especially because of their capability of able to take up a large view. So anything less than 24 can be wide angle lens. So basically the lens you are holding right now, 18 to 55, is a kind of a wide angle. And you can go further down, you can go in a full frame, you can go up to 12 to 24, and they can give you like really wide angle and takes into the view more than our focus field of vision. Be sure to check edges or frame because it will give you distortion, because it's widening up the view so much, it'll give you some kind of distortion. It's used for landscape, architecture, and street. Can be used for portrait, but you have to be careful because since it is distorting the image, if you take a portrait with wide angle, you might not look the way you look in real. the photo will be distorted, the person will be distorted, his characters, his facial expressions, everything will be distorted. But again, that depends on the photographer, what he wants to capture. Great for night sky photography. The next one we'll talk about is extreme wide angle, again 10 to 15. When you go below 15 mm, that will be like extreme. These are very expensive and landscape primarily, very distorted edges and will need correction. Correction means in post processing you might have to correct the images because they will be really distorted. It will be almost like a circle. Talking about circle, the next one comes as a fisheye. So here you can see, when you talk about extreme wide angle, you can see how the columns and all of it is just getting converged in the middle. That is what fisheye does. But then you might ask, why do we use it? We use it to capture a huge space into one frame. You want to show the huge space how it looks, you'll capture it in the particular thing. But this will give you a lot of lens distortion. This is called lens distortion, the converging. So fisheye gives you that. So 8 to 15 mm is a fisheye, and curved elements create distinct look, fun to use because a lot of new style of photographs comes out. The normal photograph that you take of a building and you take it in a fisheye, it will completely blow your mind the way the photograph will come out, and very expensive. Although it's very limited, it has a very limited use. You just use it for landscape and interior, mostly for interior and exterior photography, and good for external sports, creative photography like music, etc. You want to show the whole band in one frame, which is a huge stage. You can use a fisheye, and really good for night sky photography. The next one we were talking about is macro. I think this is the last one where we are talking about. This has the capability to go really close to object, and it's almost like a microscope where you can zoom into details that your naked eyes cannot see. So specialized design allows for closer focusing and more expensive than regular lenses. Basic lenses will cost you uh, a macro lens will cost you almost 1.5 times of a basic lens, to in a very rough way, if I have to explain. So good for portrait too, because you can really get into the facial expressions and show things about the face and things like that. Full lens in module 2 on macro. So basically when we talk about the next module, we will talk about the macro in proper way. When you're taking portrait photography, if you're using macro, make sure that what you want to zoom on. Let's say, for example, if you are zooming on the face, you can actually zoom up to the pores of the skin. So it also tells you what you want to zoom and what you want to neglect. So you can use your thing accordingly. I think that's all for today. So what I will have is, I have some 3-4 questions for you guys, just to know if you guys have understood the whole aspect of photography together. So I'll just start with that. Right. The first question that I want to ask is, one second, just hold on. Yeah. So what do you think the amount of light? You guys can just message on the Zoom platform and I'll see your answer. Then I'll know if you guys have understood the whole thing or not. The amount of light or darkness on a photograph is known as A, exposure, B, shutter speed, C, contrast, or D, sharpness. You guys can just text on the group. I'll just go back. I think I have to stop the sharing. Okay, so type your answer. It's A, exposure, B, shutter speed, C, contrast, or D, sharpness. Sai says exposure. Okay, I don't know the name, but it says iPhone. It says exposure. Okay, I'll just wait for a few more answers before I reveal the answer to you guys. Okay, exposure. Ashwit says exposure. Okay, yes, the answer is exposure. You guys have, I'm happy that you guys were attentive. That means, so the amount of light that or darkness that comes into the photograph is basically the exposure. So if you want to control the amount of light coming to, you have to control the exposure. That means also the aperture value. All right. So exposure is the answer. The next question for you guys is, one second, just. The amount. Oh, the amount of light passing through a lens is defined by what? Now, this is a little trick question. The amount of light passing through the lens is defined by what? We were talking about the light and darkness. Now we are talking about the amount of light that enters. Is it shutter speed? Is it aperture? Is it film speed? Or is it exposure? Your answer? Shutter speed, aperture, film speed, or exposure? Let's see your answer. I'm yet to receive your answers. Chalo. No answers yet. Is it too hard for you? No, I think it's a very okay. Anne Bianci says aperture. All right. Anyone else? I'll repeat the question. The amount of light passing through a lens is defined by what? Shutter speed, aperture, film speed, or exposure? Ashwit says exposure. No, Animians is an aperture. Anyone else? Okay, the answer is aperture. So basically, that's the aperture that you will be controlling. As I said, in a camera, if you want to see how much light is getting into it, you'll have to control it by aperture. That also says in a lens, you will have the lower the aperture value is, the more light it can get into it. So if you are buying a lens with 1.4 as the aperture value, that means your camera is really versatile. It can get a lot of light into it. Okay, let's go to the next question. And the next question is, a low aperture would create what? A low aperture will create what? Okay, I think I haven't shared. 1 second. Yeah, a low aperture will create what? A smaller depth of field. B, a larger depth of field. C, aperture doesn't change the depth of field. A smaller depth of field. B, a larger depth of field. Or C, aperture doesn't change the depth of field. Let's see your answer. A lower, larger depth of field. Size is larger depth of field. Okay, any more answers? And he says smaller depth of field. No, the real answer is the larger depth of field, because the moment the aperture gets less, the depth of field also increases. That means you'll have better depth because the aperture is less. That means more light is coming into the picture. That means you have more, capability to control the background and how much you want to blur out. That is why you have a larger depth of field. So I think that is all for today. I was talking about this quiz, and then if you guys have any questions, then I'd like to take up now. I'll stop the share. Any questions related to camera, lens, anything?
Looks like they don't have
Right, ma'am.
any questions
Right, ma'am.
as such today.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, I'm done for the
Yes.
class then. Because,
Okay. Anyway, they will ask. No. Thank you. You have covered really, but all the technical details of the camera that you have covered, really, you went very methodically about it. Okay,
Thank you, ma'am.
Amit. What
Thank you.
we will do is, after the 3 sessions, maybe we'll just have a casual session with the student. So maybe they feel free to have a chat with you.
Definitely, no issues with that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Amit. So see you
Thank you.
next Monday at the same
Yes,
time.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Goodbye.